agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good afternoon, Mike.
Hey, good afternoon, Jay. How are you doing this afternoon?
Well, like a special master with a pile full of presidential documents, I'm ready to dig in here.
There you go. All right. Yeah, well, we will certainly get into special masters and a whole bunch of other stuff, including that interesting response rally, I don't know, Donald Trump had in Pennsylvania after Joe Biden's speech, and the insurrectionist Trumpist who was removed from office in New Mexico, and maybe some post Labor Day thoughts on the state of labor in America, and an interesting new labor law in California that I can guarantee Jay is going to absolutely hate. So it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, we have a lot to talk about, and we will get going in just 1 second. Okay, Jay, before we get started, I want to let folks know that you and I are doing something new, or at least we are embarking on something new in the weeks to come, and that is Mike and Jay's book club. It's sort of an idea that we've been talking about this kind of randomly for years, and finally we are going to stop talking about it and actually do it. So here's how it's going to work. It's going to be a regular feature of the supporters bonus show, that midweek show, and Jay and I are going to alternately pick books, and then we'll let you know what they are ahead of time so you can follow along if you will, and we're going to take a few chapters every week, so small enough chunks where if you do want to follow along, you don't have some kind of huge reading load, and we're going to pick things that are obviously political and things that we might disagree on, and so we think it should be a lot of fun, and we're also going to encourage folks, if you do want to follow along, to send in your questions and observations. You can post them on Discord or mail them to us, and your thoughts and ideas can be part of the show as well. I think it could be a lot of fun, or Jay, it could be a total disaster, but we're going to try it out anyway.
Sure. Yeah. So what's our first book going to be, Mike?
Our first book is a book called Everything, All the Time, Everywhere: How We Became Postmodern by Stuart Jeffries. And
sounds fun.
It's definitely, you guys could probably tell, this is my choice. Actually, Stuart Jeffries is the author of another book that I'm currently reading about the lives of the founders of the Frankfurt School, kind of a neo-Marxist group. And so, yeah, that's right up my alley. But anyway, I am sure Jay will have a lot to say about everything, all the time, everywhere. I know I will, and I'm hoping that a number of you will pick it up and join in with our conversation, with their questions and thoughts. So that will start. We're off next week, Jay and I are. So that will start in a couple weeks. So you have plenty of time to get your book order in and send any questions to us. So there we go. Okay.
Great.
With that out of the way, we'll start with our top story. On Monday, Federal District Judge Eileen Cannon ordered the appointment of a special master to review documents seized by the FBI from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home and office. Now, Judge Cannon, who was appointed to the bench by Trump in November of 2000, wrote in her opinion that while there had not been a compelling showing of callous disregard for Trump's constitutional rights, he faces the risk of irreparable injury, both from the potential use of privileged materials in future prosecution, as well as from reputational injury, with Judge Cannon concluding that as a function of plaintiff's former position as President of the United States, the stigma associated with the subject seizure is in a league of its own. A future indictment based to any degree on property that ought to be returned would result in reputational harm of a decidedly different order of magnitude. Now, in addition to ordering a special master, Judge Cannon ordered a temporary injunction on the government's use of those seized materials for investigative purposes, aside from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence ongoing national security assessment of those materials. The way Cannon put it is to appoint a special master to make privilege determinations while simultaneously allowing the government in the interim to continue using potentially privileged material for investigative purposes would be to ignore the pressing concerns and hope for the best. Now, a lot of legal experts were surprised at the ruling, arguing either that Cannon might somehow feel beholden to the president who appointed her, or that she's in essence creating a special legal status for former presidents that doesn't exist either in law or any commonly accepted interpretation of law. And I should point out, it's not just those on the left who are saying this. For instance, former Attorney General Bill Barr called Cannon's decision deeply flawed in a number of ways in an interview he had with Fox News. And he said that the Justice Department should appeal, which it has, but even if the decision stands on appeal, it represents less a win for Trump than what he termed a rain delay for a couple of innings, which that's kind of a weird metaphor because rain delays don't last innings. But anyway, we get his point. And in fact, on Thursday, DOJ filed an appeal to Cannon's order, asked that she allow them to use classified records, which they call a discrete set of just over 100 documents, arguing that her order was preventing them from determining whether there might be additional classified records that are being improperly stored. And they note that in their initial search, they found a number of empty folders marked as classified, which led them to conjecture that these contents might have been lost or somehow otherwise compromised. And they further argued that the halt in the investigation may irreparably injure their investigation, which involves risks to national security. And in response to this, Judge Cannon directed Trump's attorneys to respond to this by Monday. So, Jay, there's a lot here. What do you think, I guess, first about the ruling and then the reactions to this? Then we can talk about how we see this all playing out.
So the ruling, there's a couple things going on. The first is the adequacy of the Justice Department's scan team, right, to be able to weed out stuff that is privileged. Now, there's two kinds of privileges we'll talk about here, but the first being just plain old attorney-client privilege. And there were, at this point, the Justice Department identified at least 500 some documents that fit that bill, right, that are privileged, regardless of whether you're a former president or not, ought to be kept from the investigative view. And she suggested that, there were other sort of lapses in that screening process that indicated that others, some of these attorney-client privilege documents could get through. Therefore, it's good to have essentially a second set of eyes that would there would be less risk of contamination, I guess. That would be the best word. So on that, I think she's on pretty solid ground. Again,
before you get to the second issue, I think a lot of folks, including I, would take issue with that on legal grounds, because it sounded like to me in reading her ruling on this that she basically created sort of a special extra level of scrutiny when we're talking about former presidents. And of course, that's nowhere in law. And in fact, there are plenty of instances in which there are governmental investigations that involve matters of privilege, and they're almost all handled by some sort of review team, and not a special master, which is far less common. And so I just want to point out that I understand your argument, but I think that one can reasonably take issue with that and say that she is in fact setting up sort of a different standard that wouldn't have been in place had this been, you or I.
I mean, that's probably true. I guess what I meant by not controversial, I was going to say that there's really no question that the feds who are investigating you shouldn't get attorney-client privileged material.
Right, which is why they set up those teams.
That is uncontroversial. I would agree that his status as a former president changes maybe the special master determination, but it doesn't change the privilege determination. And I guess that special master piece goes to, and the judge set this out early in her opinion that says, listen, I'm being asked to do this under the court's equity jurisdiction, essentially, so it's not necessarily. In equity, you sort of play a little faster and looser, and you take into account other concerns. And one of the concerns she notes is this is a matter of great public interest and a matter of great public concern, and you will want to avoid the appearance. On the one hand, I mean, I understand your concern of saying well, is there a special rule for Trump? But also, given the history of the two parties involved, and so much of the response, this is something that the American public needs to have confidence is handled correctly. And I think the decision saying, listen, we're going to do this, and as Bill Barr points out, it's a rain delay, right? To make sure we get that right, given that this is the first time in history you've ever had a search warrant executed on a former president. I think that's a pretty important interest. And you could say it's unprecedented, and you'd be right. But this is, that's the nature of this situation where you're executing a warrant on the most recent occupant of the White House. So, well,
I got to say, I both agree with the critics about the legal reasoning and the concern about creating special status for people simply because they're. I think that even the logic about, well, the damage to his reputation, it could be worse because he's president. Well, your reputation can be irreparably damaged even if you're, city council person Jones or something like that. Yeah. So I think that's crummy logic. But even so, even if I don't agree with her or think she's on much shakier ground than you do legally, I agree with you as a practical matter. As a practical matter, I think it's not only the right decision, but if I were Merrick Garland, I would have maybe even considered requesting some sort of a special master from the outset, given all of those things you talk. Now, but I should say, I understand that would be essentially slowing down your own investigation, and they are making claims that could potentially lead to other issues, which sounds like, well, the more time goes by, we think there's some stuff they still have that they're trying to get rid of or something. I don't know. That's my sense of things. And so they would have to weigh that. But I agree with you that because... Go ahead.
Yeah. I shouldn't interrupt you. I'm agreeing with you.
Keep on going, yeah.
But no, or if you're more sinister, conspiracy-minded and believe that the FBI does stuff like, alters emails to get warrants and that sort of thing, you might also think you might be concerned by the Justice Department's, no, we really need to hurry this up. After he's been out of office for a year and a half. There are some who might get the sense that we're rushing for an indictment before the midterms.
No, I don't think that's going to happen.
That's the concern.
Well, no, I don't think that's the concern at all.
I'm not saying I'm one of those people.
Okay, I got you.
A reasonable an observer, right? If that's one of the things that we need to guard against in this day and age, if we're going to protect the reputation of institutions and show that they are acting on the up and up, and we're able to trust the conclusions that these institutions draw. The more of a rush to judgment that there appears to be, the more that weakens.
Well, and I think sort of the other approach to this, again, I'll go back to Bill Barr, who I find myself sort of using to defend my case much more than I ever thought I would. In other remarks he made to Fox about, you're talking about this, why the rush to judgment. He said, how long is government going to try to get those documents back? They jawboned for a year. They were deceived on the voluntary actions taken. Then they went and got a subpoena. They were deceived on that, they feel, and the facts are starting to show that they're being jerked around. And so how long, how long do they wait? That's Barr's point, and I think there's something to that.
Yeah, no, there is. But I think again, the fact that they talked for as long as they did sort of takes some of the urgency out of this, right? Again, this is when we talked about this when it first broke. Of is there an imminent national security threat? And it didn't seem to be.
Well, see, I think, as I understand,
we know, we don't know. But.
Well, as I understand, and again, this is all, we're not getting the volume of leaks that would make this easier to talk about. But as what I understand, at least one theory of what's going on here is that there is increasing concern that as the pressure has mounted, that the Trump people may have materials in their possession that would be better if they didn't, and so they are looking into ways to either conceal or destroy them, or make use of them in some way. And so, I mean, so to me, it makes perfect sense that at first everyone's kind of casual. It's like, hey, you got some stuff. You forgot to bring it back. Oh, okay, yeah. And we kind of go back and forth. Then all of a sudden, when it seems like, oh, wow, maybe there's some net that's closing on us, maybe we should look through this and get rid of some of this stuff, essentially. And that, I think, is DOJ's concern. And it seems to me to be not an unreasonable concern.
Yeah, not an unreasonable one, but I think that concern ought to take a backseat to the view, the whether the public can trust what the Justice Department is doing, because there's a lot of distrust out there.
Well, I wouldn't say, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I wouldn't say it takes a back seat, but I think that those things both need to be weighed. And you may.
And I say the one outweighs the other.
Yeah, I can see that. I come to a somewhat different conclusion, but yeah. The other element of this, right, we wanted to talk about is the privilege, and there are two types of privilege, as you pointed out, at work here, at least potentially. One that's definitely, and one that is probably not, but we can't tell for sure, right? And the first, of course, is Go ahead.
Well, the first, of course, it was that attorney-client privilege stuff we talked about, and there's other sort of just miscellaneous confidential documents that may or may not have been seized. They're, Trump tax records or medical records or other things that you would have some sort of interest in privacy in otherwise. And then the other, which is a little more controversial, is executive privilege materials, which Trump has claimed. And the big question, of course, is, well, can you claim executive privilege when you are no longer the executive? So there's a case, and both sides cite this. Nixon versus government services.
GSA.
Yeah. And it's not. This is not the earlier Nixon in the tape subpoena case. This is a later 1977 Nixon case, where Nixon sought to block, really kind of similar to what's going on here, a review by archivists of various material that he has, and the Supreme Court comes to the conclusion, well, look, yes, there's an interest in executive privilege, and they sort of hint that there is an interest in executive privilege even for former executives. But they don't really spell that out, right? They sort of get to the point of, well, regardless, in this case, the interest of the archivist is not overly intrusive into any executive privilege. And therefore, turn over the stuff, Dick. And so that's how that plays out. But I think you can fairly read the case, and I did. I went back through this because the government took a really expansive view of this, and they sort of said, well, you can't claim executive privilege against the executive branch, and that's really not what the case says. I mean, the case does have that quote in there, and then it follows up as saying, but there's something to a former executive, a former president's claim of privilege, and also sort of acknowledges that to the extent it exists, it sort of wanes the longer that person is out of office, and it also wanes in comparison to current occupants of the office.
And one difference here, but there's one difference here is that in this case, President Biden has, I don't believe for these documents specifically, but from other Trump documents that were given, he has basically said that executive privilege is waived, whereas in the 77 case, that wasn't the case. The sitting president did not explicitly waive the privilege, and that matters as well too, because the court has held that.
I don't know whether they explicitly waived it or not, but there's a line in there that essentially says that, well, maybe they did waive, but it does indicate that the Carter administration, or the Ford administration, the Carter administration, didn't see this material as being executive privilege material. So whether there was we're officially waiving this on behalf of the United States or not, regardless, that was something else the court looked at, that the current administrations did not view this to be as crucial as what Nixon had.
So I don't disagree.
And the court sort of took that in as a factor, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you here. Actually, I don't think. In fact, on the left, there was a lot of commentary coming out about how this was like the the worst judicial decision in the history of I don't know what, but that it was just horrible in 38 different ways. And and I read it. I was expecting to see some screed written in crayon or something like that. And
Right.
I read through it. And
Stop the steal.
Well, my reaction to it was, okay, at certain points, this seems to be a stretch a little bit, and this does a little bit, but it didn't seem to me to be at all this indispensable legal disaster that so many people pointed it out to be. Maybe deeply flawed, as Bill Barr says. Maybe so, but
and here's the other point. This is something that goes to what the job of a district court judge tends to be. And one of the most important things that the district court judge does is build the record for an appeals court. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, especially on issues of privilege, that as the saying goes, privilege stuff, once it's been released, that's a bell that can't be unrung. So if you're seeking to preserve these issues, right, and that let somebody else figure this out, appointing a special master so that these bells are not unrung, I think is a pretty reasonable way to go. And also, if you're just from the practical point, balancing the potential harms of loss of privilege, potential loss of executive privilege or attorney-client privilege, versus the potential delay in a criminal investigation. I think that weighs in favor of appointing the special master.
In a way,
who can come back and say, look, I think what the Justice Department screening people did is entirely appropriate. That's exactly, I have the same thing. Here's what I think that you should hand back, and here's what you can't. And then obviously that would be subject to a separate review. But
no, in the end, I tend to agree with you, and I guess the former Attorney General on this, that this delays things a little bit, and maybe it does make it more likely if there in fact are people working for Trump who are interested in concealing documents. It gives them more time to do that. But honestly, at this point, I would think that they'd had all the time that they really would need, and so I'm not entirely persuaded by the government's argument either. And so on balance, I think this is a reasonable outcome. And I wouldn't say I was surprised that the government appealed, but in a way, I feel like, why don't you just go ahead and find the special master? And my understanding is that both the government and Trump's people are going to suggest folks to the judge. And if they can't mutually agree on someone, she will appoint that person. That's going to be a little trickier than normal because you need someone with not just top secret clearance, but with SCI clearance. And honestly, I wouldn't want the job if I, because that no matter what happens, you're going to get, unless you say everything is privileged, you're going to get all kinds of heat from Donald Trump and the Trump people, and who wants those headaches? So it might be tougher. It might be tough to find somebody who's both qualified and willing to take on the job. I don't know, but.
Yeah.
So how do you see this is going to play out?
I suspect they'll find something.
Oh yeah, I think so. So how do you see this playing out on appeal and just kind of down the line?
I think what they filed just recently on the appeal, which is to stay the judge's order, appointed special master. I don't know that gets overturned right away, because again, my sense with the special master is that it strikes me very much as a no harm, no foul type solution, and unless the government has a compelling story to tell, and they may well have that story, we just haven't seen it yet, right? About why this delay would be so unacceptable. Then I think the court shouldn't do anything in terms of expedited relief on appeal. I think it's a good appeal question regardless, right? Mm-hmm. You still tee it up and it goes through the normal process. Do you need to stay the part that stops the government from looking through stuff while the special master moves forward? I don't know that you do. I think that's a tough showing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That makes sense. So in the end, then you and I are.
And there's also, it can be remanded back for further, work this out so that, can we come up with a better compromise that protects both the privileges and does not unduly impede the investigation, that sort of thing. So I think there's that kind of room. I certainly see why the Justice Department appeals it, just because that's what you sort of have to do institutionally.
Gotcha. Sure.
I
guess in the end, I feel like we're not dealing with millions of documents, right? This is not a Herculean task or anything.
Like 11,000.
Yeah. I mean, so it'll take a little while, but in the end, I really feel, again, and it's difficult to say, right, because there's all sorts of things we don't know and probably never will know that the Justice Department knows or thinks it knows or believes. Yeah. But just based on what we've seen, my initial inclination is to feel that the Justice Department did not handle this as well as it could have politically, even if legally it was fine. I guess is where I sort of find myself coming down on this.
Oh yeah, I mean that's where I've been from the beginning on this. To me, if he wasn't complying with the subpoena, I think the proper response is you go to court and say, Your Honor, Mr. Trump is not complying with the subpoena, as opposed to moving forward with the search warrant.
See, this is where you and I part company, because I'm more inclined to believe that this was a point at which they were like, we're getting indications that they're moving stuff and monkeying around with stuff in ways, and we need to move now. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, and again, those are facts that neither of us know, just because it's still sealed. But yeah, exactly.
My assumption is that was part of the application on the redacted part of the affidavit. That was the reason why Judge Reinhart granted the warrant in the first place. So, but yeah, all right. Any other thoughts on this before we move on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
We're in surprising agreement on this.
Largely, yeah. Well, let's see I don't know if we'll keep it up, but we will find out here as we move on to our next story. All right, and next story. Well, I'll start back last week, because last week, Trey, Ken, and I talked about Joe Biden's Pennsylvania rally with the sort of, I think, bizarro world result of Trey actually being a bigger fan of Biden's speech than either Ken or I were. And toward the end of that segment, Ken wondered out loud who exactly the audience for the speech was. And that was kind of a question that I had too. And this week, it's been suggested that, well, maybe the audience was in part Donald Trump, and that Biden was hoping to sort of goad the former president into reacting and helping Biden and the Democratic Party make Trump the focus of the midterm elections. Because after all, when you're as unpopular as Joe Biden, why wouldn't you want to focus as much attention as you can on a politician who's even more unpopular than, you are? And so, whether or not Biden's speech was intended to bait Trump definitely responded with his own interesting, very Trumpian speech in Pennsylvania at a rally ostensibly in support of Pennsylvania gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano and Senate candidate Dr. Oz. But just like about every Trump speech, it ended up being...
Who got mentioned occasionally.
Exactly. It's Donald Trump and his grievances. Just to pick out some of the highlights, if you will, he called President Biden an enemy of the state, called his Pennsylvania speech the most vicious, hateful, and divisive speech ever delivered by an American president. And I should know, vilifying 75 million citizens, plus another probably 75 to 150. I think you just threw that in there. I don't know, but anyway, I think so.
Probably.
And he also said that the FBI and the Justice Department have become vicious monsters controlled by radical left scoundrels, lawyers, and the media who tell them what to do, and that in the 2020 election, what the FBI did was corruption and election interference on a scale we have never seen before in our country, and that Republicans locally that ran things in a lot of states should be ashamed of themselves. He also expressed anger at the billions being spent in aid to Ukraine, not because he's against helping Ukraine, but if he'd been president, he would have said in his words, Vladimir, you're not going to do that, Vladimir, and Putin would have somehow been dissuaded from invading in the first place. And then, along the way, he called for fast trials and swift executions for drug dealers, and in kind of a throwaway line, suggested that Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman that he supports taxpayer-funded drug dens and the complete criminalization of illegal drugs, including heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, and ultra-lethal fentanyl. And by the way, he takes them himself. So Crazy
Also
town.
complained about Starbucks CEO's Howard Schultz's thin legs.
Yeah, you can pick out so much there.
And another bizarre sort of Howard Schultz. The guy's got very thin legs. Have you ever seen this guy? Very thin.
Donald Trump. Yeah, thank you, folks.
Just sort of strange non sequitur. But
I'll be here all week. Catch me on Truth Social. But so what did you, aside from, and we both picked out our kind of own sort of hollers, and to us they are, but of course to a lot of people, they hear former president and they think rightful president of the United States saying that, by the way, the FBI didn't just illegally raid my house. Did you know that they were part of the rigged election in 2020? No. But what did you make of his speech?
So to me, it's kind of funny because if you like I did, right? You sent me the transcript. I didn't watch it. So you start reading, and it starts out with the what you might expect in a president or a former president giving a stump speech for other candidates. The other side's really screwed stuff up, and you got terrible crime here in Philadelphia, and there's all kinds of trouble. But thank goodness we've got Doug Mastriano here and Dr. Oz to help set it straight. You need to get out there and vote, and so it starts out very much like a typical stump speech type thing, and then just veers into again the list of Trump grievances. I don't know who the audience is for the Trump speech stuff anymore, right? I really don't. I suppose there's this cult following type thing that loves what he says, but I've always gotten the sense that there are a lot of people who just kind of go to these things just for more the entertainment value. I don't know.
I don't know. When I look at it,
in terms of, I guess that's my take. Does the Trump speech move the needle on much of anything? It probably whips up a little bit of extra enthusiasm for those candidates, to the extent that they were mentioned at all. But no, does it? Otherwise, it just kind of strikes me as, Trump's kind of, it's just the same thing we've seen before for quite a while. And I don't know, there's no new material, right?
Gotcha.
It's the same as his last album.
So you're saying it's not that it's not outrageous and filled with just the most ridiculous lies like so many of his campaign events, but that anyone who's even remotely paying attention is aware that on the stump, Trump just makes stuff up.
It's not even interesting lies. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, the John Fetterman, by the way, crystal meth, cocaine, heroin user. That's
Well, he does them all.
He tries to. But I guess that's a good point, right? Because even if there's this sort of idea that Joe Biden was playing 3D chess and trying to goad Trump into a response,
I think there was something to that, right? Because I think it's entirely predictable that that's the response Trump has. But also that said, look, Trump probably gives that stump speech regardless of whether Biden gave his speech or not.
Yeah, probably. It just gets a little bit. Yeah, there's a little bit different.
It gets a little less coverage. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, it doesn't really it's not likely to move the needle a whole heck of a lot. And the best thing it does as far as Donald Trump is concerned is keeps Donald Trump front and center. And I think
and that's what the best thing for the Democratic Party at this point, too.
Exactly.
He's happy to oblige. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, obviously, going back, Donald Trump and being Donald Trump is the only reason why, the Democrats are able to effectively control the Senate, right? Because there's no way that both of those seats in Georgia would have gone. So yeah, he's not the Republican Party's best friend, at least in a strategic sense, I don't think, here in the midterms. But kind of the larger question, I think it seems clear to me that for a lot of reasons, momentum is shifting toward Democrats. And while I feel like at this point, that may be enough to allow them to keep the Senate, I've been starting to see some folks saying, well, it's not crazy to think that Democrats could hold the House. And that's where I sort of get off that ride, because I just, I think maybe if it were 6 months until the election and things got a lot better, a lot quicker, that wouldn't seem quite as like wishful thinking. But honestly, I that just seems to me to be borderline delusional, I would say.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And the other piece of that to keep in mind is House races are different than Senate races, in that just the districts are different, right? And those battleground districts, there is a lot of, for lack of a better word, territory, right, that the Democrats are holding right now that in most years they probably wouldn't hold, right?
Yeah.
Those were Republicans who just were fed up with Trump. They were not necessarily Joe Biden fans or Democrats at heart. They were just fed up with Trump, and I think there's sort of a return to the mean on these things, especially when the economy is not going great. And also something else that I think is, I think the House seats are more susceptible to the wave election phenomenon than Senate seats are. Again, that goes into just sort of the whole generating turnout as opposed to Senate seats, I think tend to be more candidate by candidate. And you get states that have just very, very weird bounces, right? So I think, I can see that there, and there's so much more money spent on Senate races too, right? But in cases you might be more willing to vote for the generic whatever Republican in your House race, but maybe there's a Senate candidate you'd cross the aisle for.
But even there, in Senate races, it would not surprise me if Republicans end up with a 1 or even a 2-seat majority after the elections. I mean, take a look at, for instance, Georgia.
Well, especially if Fetterman keeps taking all the drugs.
Right. But I mean, you take a look at Georgia, right, where it looked like, Walker was struggling mightily, and Warnock was. But now you look at the most recent polling as we get closer to election, polling becomes more predictive. All of a sudden, Walker has a slight lead on him in many polls, and I still tend to think that until I'm proven wrong on this,
Republicans under poll. Yeah.
Exactly, that Republicans under poll. You take a look at someone like a Stacey Abrams, right, again in Georgia, who a lot of people thought, she's going to do really well, and now it looks like she is just struggling mightily in her race. And so, again, for Democrats to say, well, at least we'll have the Senate, I would say, hey, it would be a mistake to count on that sort of thing, because, whenever I look at the polls still, and I understand the arguments about Democratic voters being more energized this time in post-Dobbs environment and the special elections and all that, and I take that into account. But again, I'm prepared to wake up a couple weeks after Election Day and find out that Mitch McConnell is once again the majority leader, in addition to the Democrats having lost the House. So. There we go.
Well, something else that we haven't really talked about that's sort of like an inside baseball kind of piece of this is that Mitch McConnell has also sort of opened up the purse strings in the last couple of weeks in terms of spending in some of these Senate races. Despite Trump's complaints, Trump actually has not been spending. Some of these Senate candidates, I think, would like to see certainly more money from Trump. But the Senate Republican caucus has been weighing in on some of these, and I think that's starting to make a difference. And you do start seeing things like, I don't think Fetterman is a great candidate, regardless of his drug use or non-use. Right? I mean, he's just got some baggage, and
thank God he's running against Oz. Is all I got to say.
The goofy sweats, and that's the thing, right? I mean, if there was a normal Democratic candidate in that race, I think he could have wiped the floor with Dr. Oz. But you got Fetterman who looks kind of squirrely.
Jay, spreading Fetterman drug rumors, agrees. He's on crystal meth. Yeah, that's the headline anyway.
I'm not saying he takes. I'm just saying you know what I mean. The whole.
I'm staying out of this one. You go ahead. You run
sweatshirt.
Go ahead.
Sweatshirt thing, and it's. Trump had a great bit on him also with just the sweats. He's wearing a sweatshirt. He looks dirty. He's crying. Me and Dr. Oz, we're clean freaks. We always look good. I mean, it's just, but no, I do think that matters, right? I mean, I can picture someone like my mother saying, "Oh my God, can you see this guy? I hate to meet him in a dark alley," kind of thing. is it's
Especially if you're a Trump
that's
voter,
just a
yeah,
fact.
yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot of folks say that's part of his appeal, right? He's not this kind of fake-looking sort of. It looks like a guy who dresses like a guy, and that's some of that same authenticity in a different way that different folks saw in Donald Trump. It's just
he's slumming though. He's faking the
Is he faking it though?
I don't know, the guy who rolls out of bed in his sweats. He comes from a family of means who have supported him for most of his adult life.
But that doesn't mean you're not making choices that aren't authentic for you. I mean, just Donald Trump makes sartorial choices.
I suppose that's right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah.
So, all right. But that's my point on that is I agree in that I think House races are going to be tougher to win for the Democrats just by the part of it's just the districts that they're competing in and the number of seats they have to defend, the general climate. Whereas the Senate races, I think you're right, it's going to be close. But I think that comes down to more to the candidates themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with you there. All right. Well, we love to talk about the 14th Amendment here on the podcast, or at least it comes up a lot, right, Jay? This week we've got another 14th Amendment issue to discuss, but it's not the big glamorous headliner Section 1 with all that cool stuff about due process and equal protection. That's most of what we focus on. This week it's sort of the forgotten stepchild of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which states that you can't serve in any federal or state office if you've taken an oath to support the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. Now, I don't want to do that. This last week, a New Mexico state judge named Francis Matthew removed convicted January 6th rioter and county commissioner Coy Griffin from his position based on the Constitution's insurrection clause. In his ruling, Judge Matthew wrote, "The irony of Mr. Griffin's argument that this court should refrain from applying the law and consider the will of the people in District 2 of Otero County who retained him as county commissioner against a recall effort as he attempts to defend his participation in an insurrection by a mob whose goal, by his own admission, was to set aside the results of a free, fair, and lawful election by a majority of the people of the entire country, the will of the people, has not escaped this court." Matthews argued that.
Well, I think what may have escaped it is I'm not sure that that's exactly what his admission would have been.
No, maybe not directly. Yeah. Now, the legal argument. The legal argument was more that he wrote that Griffin's crossing of those barricades to approach the Capitol, that was an overt act in support of the insurrection, as Griffin's presence closer to the Capitol building increased the insurrectionist intimidation by numbers, and that Griffin's marching with the mob all the way to the inaugural stage, knowing the mob's insurrectionary purpose, likewise constitutes an overt act. Now, Griffin said he was shocked at the ruling and that I really did not feel like the state was going to move on me in such a way. So what do you think about this decision, Jay?
I think it's incorrect on a couple fronts.
Deeply flawed?
First, I think I do think we need to look at why Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was drafted, and I think it makes sense to look at some originalist analysis here. It was to prevent people like your Jefferson Davises, right? Your people who had been officers of the United States, but literally rebelled against the United States and formed a confederacy and fought a war against the country. That I think is something apart from protesting an election result that I think most of those people who were protesting believed, and I think incorrectly, but honestly, that the election had been stolen through some sort of chicanery, and they were standing up for the actual will of the people, and that would have been a Trump victory. Now, I think they're wrong on the facts, but that I think when you start defining, this gets in sort of the second piece of it, defining down insurrection or rebellion into disagreement with the government, and even law breaking. I think we're into a sort of a territory we don't want to get into. As I understand, this guy was convicted of, it was basically trespassing, right? He wasn't.
Misdemeanor trespassing, and he was acquitted of disorderly conduct.
Yeah, so I mean that's different than, to me, insurrection. What if that's if that sort of trespassing is insurrection, and again, it's if he was not charged, and the judge's opinion even went on to say, look, it doesn't matter even if he's doing this in a peaceful manner. And I think that was even what's even most problematic for me, right? If he's peacefully protesting, and he's not where he's supposed to be, in whatever you want to call it, civil disobedience, and you're going to say we're going to bar you from holding any office for life. I think that is extreme, and I think what it invites is courts to disqualify candidates, or to disqualify candidates through litigation rather than through elections, which I think is just generally unhealthy for the Republic.
Yeah, on this, I'm going to agree with you, I think, almost entirely. To me, it seems like there need to be two elements, right? Number one, there has to have been an insurrection. And number two, that the person who's being charged has to understand it as an insurrection that he or she was actively aiding. And even if you make the case that there was an insurrection, and I think you can make that case, you and I have kind of gone back and forth now, you still, I think, need to prove too. And I don't know that you can really demonstrate that. And it seems to me that even if you can, the way to do that is not to have some judge say, yeah, felt like an insurrection to me. But, I should point out, this engaging in inciting an insurrection, it's a federal crime. And so what seems to me to be the kind of the bar you have to cross is saying, well, were you convicted of this crime? Did you plead guilty to this crime? Okay, then you're an insurrectionist,
I would agree with you 100% there. If there had been a conviction for, insurrection, or even something that is more, bigger than trespassing.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, there are over 900 people who have been charged with various things related to January 6th, but only a handful, literally, have been charged with seditious conspiracy, and that's working together to plan the overthrow of the government, prevent execution of the laws. There's some Oath Keeper guys, some Proud Boy folks, and that sort of thing. And there, I think the case is a lot stronger. But I feel like if you don't have enough evidence to say, well, we can bring a successful case against you, then the idea that you would prevent the people from judging on their own whether somebody did something that was beyond the pale, that to me is judicial usurpation of power and like the worst kind of judicial activism.
Yeah, what about, if they couldn't even convict him of disorderly conduct.
Yeah, so how does...
if you think about that, if that were the test, there would be quite a few baby boomer Democrats who could have been or should have been removed from office for protests against the Vietnam War. Or that sort of thing, civil rights marches. They're out there challenging the authority. I suppose they weren't challenging the authority of the federal government in some of those cases. In certain the draft cases, they were. I think that's it. And if it gets to the point of, again, as this judge said in his opinion, even speaking, gives aid and comfort to those, then that seems to really dissolve your freedom of speech. And it's one thing to say, okay, if you're convicted of inciting a riot, but again, he wasn't charged or convicted with that. I think this is troubling. And there were two similar cases, right? The state representative, or not state representative, but Representative Madison Cawthorn, I believe, who was, they tried to strike him from the ballot for being an insurrectionist. And it turns out they didn't really need to.
Yeah. He took care of that himself. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, I think that's the better route. He went to court and fought for his right to be on the ballot, and they put him on the ballot, and he got shellacked. So, Yeah, I think that's the much healthier response.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So
We're getting along really well.
Why don't we end then with something that I am pretty sure
outrageous.
Yeah, something outrageously great. Anyway, so this past Monday was Labor Day in the United States, as many folks probably know. And so I thought it would be fitting for us to talk about, we'll probably have time for at least one story, about an important new labor law in California that was signed into law, in fact, on Labor Day by Governor Newsom. And this is the Fast Food Accountability and Standards Recovery Act. It creates a 10-person council made up of business, labor, and government representatives to designate a minimum wage for the fast food industry in California, which could go as high as $22 an hour, with annual raises of either 3.5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. And the council would also be in charge of establishing industry-wide health and safety standards. Now, 4 members of the council would represent workers, 4 would be from the business side, and any actions by the council would require 6 votes in favor. And once they make their recommendations, the California legislature would still be able to reject or change those recommendations, as would the state OSHA agency for health and safety related recommendations. And this law will apply to any fast food chain in California that has at least 100 stores nationwide that share a common brand. And to give you a sense of impact, there are an estimated 550,000 fast food workers in the state that would be covered by the new law, which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce termed a radical proposal to micromanage the fast food industry. And the states, in fact, I should point out that the state's own Department of Finance came out against the law, finding that it would, in their words, lead to a fragmented regulatory and legal environment for employers and raise long-term costs across industries. Now, the sort of thing that's being done here is called sectoral bargaining, which focuses on a particular industry as opposed to trying to, the method that's commonly used in the United States is where a union works with a specific employer or a specific business location. That's called enterprise-based bargaining. And you can see from the labor's point of view, sort of the benefit is that you cover a lot more in one fell swoop, basically. And so that's why this approach that proved successful, at least successfully passed in California, is, at least according to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, being considered by activists in states like New York and Illinois. So, Jay, like I said, I would be absolutely gobsmacked if I didn't know how you stood on this. But why don't you go ahead and either confirm or deny my suspicions here?
I will confirm all of your suspicions, and I will. My God, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was really much too milquetoast in their opposition to this. My first, I guess, the first question is who elects these commissioners? The answer, as you answered, is well, they're not elected, and they're appointed by people, and they can make rules unless other bureaucrats decide to change the rules. The next question is, this will, I think, devastate jobs for a lot of young people who get their start in these kind of low skill kind of jobs. And yeah, it's low skill, it's crummy, but that's where people start. That's where they get experience in the workplace. Third, this is going to lead to fewer people being employed in that industry. I think you'll see more and more companies go to some sort of automated ordering or that sort of thing. Fourth, if you look at the people who tend to go to these fast food restaurants, it's going to be impacting more and more people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. It's going to be significant inflation. If you're talking about wages of $22 an hour, I think it's just dreadful for all of those reasons, the procedural ones, as well as the actual policy ones, and even more so. There's this idea that you're treating franchises, right, which are separate independent entities, as part of the one larger big corporation.
Sure, sort of. Yeah, great way to great way to get out of responsibility. But a whole other story. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's the point. And I mean, I think it's so often people don't think about this, but McDonald's doesn't sell hamburgers. McDonald's sells hamburger franchises.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, they sell a business plan and then the branding that goes with it. And that's how so many of these places operate. And a lot of these franchises have been great small businesses for people to get involved in, and especially people who come in with maybe not a lot of business experience skills. And I'm thinking of a lot of immigrants in particular who could save up and then own their own business through this model and really do quite well for themselves. And there's this sort of punitive type idea that you're going to treat the small businessman who owns the one McDonald's the same way you're treating McDonald's Corporation, which is something different. So that's a short list of my reasons why this is a terrible.
Yeah, I figured you'd come out firing. I did not necessarily expect the 4-point list. I'm impressed, and so let me say this: I am of two minds on this. I like this in theory. I love the idea of sectoral bargaining. I think it's a big, important thing that labor should be working to do a lot more, and especially in states that are going to be likely to be more sympathetic to it, like California, Illinois, New York, those kind of the bluest of blue states. So that being said, and you and I have talked about minimum wage laws, which this basically kind of is a backdoor way of doing for a sector, that I understand your concerns. I think they're all valid concerns. And to me, they're not reasons to not do it. They are just factors considered, because on the other hand, there's plenty of research suggesting that certainly for the people who are getting the higher wages, that can lift a lot of people out of poverty. So there are some pretty considerable pluses to this, I believe.
Yeah, while those jobs exist.
And all those jobs aren't going to go away, Jay. But some of them will, sure. And so to me, it's a balance. And so this is where while I like the idea in theory, I searched for quite a bit of time yesterday looking for good analyses of these from California's own agencies, from the Chamber of Commerce. I found a lot of rhetoric, but what I didn't find was any decent budgetary analysis about things that you were talking about. And I know that those sort of analyses are possible because I've seen them in many other instances. And so where I end up coming down on this is, yeah, I would love to vote for this if I were in that position. But you need to show me the numbers, and you need to convince me that the arguments that people like Jay Carson are suggesting, that those don't override any good that's being done. And so I am certainly inclined to support measures like this, but I couldn't say that I think this is a good idea for California, simply because despite my best efforts to find some really solid data, all I could find was a whole lot of posturing, basically, aside from that Department of Finance, which really didn't focus on so much cost to workers and employers, just focused on effects on state government. So that's why I guess when I'm unsure about something like that, if I were pushed to vote on this one way, I would vote against it without having additional information. So I don't want to say I'm with you on this, Jay, because I don't think you're even temperamentally inclined to support it.
No, I'm not temperamentally inclined to support it.
Whereas I am,
because just because I think a free market works much better, and wages should fluctuate based on location to some extent too, right? There's a supply and demand of labor, and what the market charges in certain places, right? It's going to so. Again, I think those are decisions best left to the markets and the individual actors in them, and that's you end up with a better efficiency. And you've seen, right, rising wages, and the problem that so many places are having is not that. It's that they can't find workers. So there's this natural impulse that they're going to.
They can find workers. So that's with the market. I love how folks on the right put it that way. Is what it means is they can't find people to work at what they're willing to pay. So the problem isn't that they can't find workers. The problem is they're not paying enough.
But they keep raising their wages, though. And they're still not attractive. I can still walk to the plaza here, the block from my office where I go to lunch, and every single place has a help wanted hiring bonus. Come on in. Now, maybe that's not enough. And maybe if they have to compete with different government benefits and government outlays, well, that makes it a little tougher. There is a point that people will come back and work, assuming that they don't get a better deal not to work.
And at this point, they're not really. That's not really the case, given that COVID era benefits are
it's winding down.
Yeah. So, and I also want to say that I think that, again, not having.
Although that also differs state to state, right?
Sure.
Here in Ohio, it's pretty much wound down. There are other states that that's not the case.
I don't think that there's any place where it's economically a better case or a better place for you to go ahead and just get whatever remaining COVID benefits there are, as opposed to getting the sort of job you could potentially get in this labor market.
But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be better, right? Because the comparison isn't between this job will pay me X, this job will pay me Y. It's sort of I can make X and do absolutely nothing and have complete freedom and do it, Yeah,
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that either. Yeah. I don't think. But again, I'm not going to say for sure, given that I don't have the data in front of me. But I think that's I think that's wrong. But I do want to point out, though, that my sense or my belief on this is that probably the groups that will be most affected are lower income groups for a variety of reasons, and so. Ideally, I would have preferred, been more inclined to support something like this if it's paired with something like an increase in California's earned income tax credit, which they have at the state level. They also have a thing called the young child tax credit, and something to kind of offset what I think would probably end up being disproportionate economic harm to folks who are least able to absorb that sort of economic harm. So
we're going to cut your jobs, charge you more for your burgers, but then we'll also pay you more in tax credits.
Well, no. I mean, I think it's certainly redistributionist. Absolutely.
I mean, isn't that sort of exactly what the problem is? You're disincentivizing work. And instead of incentivizing government handouts.
If I can incentivize people to eat less fast food, I'm all for that. If we want to get into public health costs and all that.
All right.
So I think especially in this industry, there's an especially strong case to be made that if government policy is in part designed to get people to do more of some things and less of other things, government policy that pushes people to eat less fast food, I think that's a big win for public health and Americans in general.
People like burgers.
People like a lot of stuff. People like crystal meth, I guess, Doug Fetterman, whoever, right. So that doesn't mean we encourage it, So yeah, but anyway, that's what I think makes us a little bit different as well. But that is another issue that maybe we will tackle on another show. But for now, before we do go, I want to once again mention to folks, hey, check out When the People Decide. It's a podcast that takes a deep dive into citizen initiatives. I have been listening all season. I've learned a lot, and I knew it would be great from the start because I've actually had on the show a lot of the people behind it, the McCourtney Institute. Great folks. They put together great podcasts. So if you haven't listened to it yet, take a minute, make a mental note, post-it note, whatever kind of notes you happen to make, and put When the People Decide in your podcast queue. Give it a listen. And, of course, you can find When the People Decide wherever you get the politics guys. All right. Well, that does it for this week's show. And if you're not already a supporter of the politics guys, we hope you will consider becoming one, because without our supporters, we would not be able to do this. And when you become a supporter, you get all sorts of good stuff like ad-free versions of everything we put out. You get the midweek show. There's various supporter level stuff at various levels. You can check it out at patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us on Venmo or at Politics Guys or through PayPal. And you can find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get that midweek show, but you are just not at a point where you can support us financially right now, totally not a problem. We get it. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you set up with access to the midweek show. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us if you subscribe, rate, and review us on the podcast app you happen to be using, and sharing episodes on social media also helps. And if you want to reach us for whatever reason, hey, if you're a supporter, you know there's that great Discord group we have where fun stuff's happening pretty much every day. We're on Facebook and Twitter. You'll find links in the show notes. You can also reach us in the old school 20th century way, mail@politicsguys.com. And finally, a special thanks to our executive producers. They are the best. Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode.
And Mike,
go ahead.
Well, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
We should have
it's a spoiler.
We should have mentioned that we had a shout out to all our new friends we met in Cincinnati last week.
Yes.
But, Mike and I were actually at an event together, and it turned into a sort of a weird impromptu Politics Guys Live with alcohol show. So, but thanks for those people for their understanding.
Yes, absolutely. It was a really, really fun event, and I'm glad we got to experience it. I'll say that.
Yes.
All right. Well, again, we'll be back with, Trey and Ken, I guess, will be back with a new episode for you next week. But then Jay and I will be back the week after that, and we hope you'll tune in.